On today's Palace of Pistons podcast, Shaq doesn't watch the Detroit Pistons. Who the hell cares? Jaden Ivey, what's his deal? Is he going to be back this season? And do the Pistons need a few more statement wins before they enter the NBA playoffs? All that and more on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Johnson Phillips. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Johnson Phillips hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Hello, Pistons fans, and welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe. It's myself, Aaron Johnson, and joining me this week is Jasper Apollonia. Jasper, the Pistons continue to win basketball games. They did drop a couple on their Western Conference road trip, going 2-2 on the trip, but overall they remain one of the hottest teams in the league. They've statistically been one of the best teams in the league for well over a month now. But how are we doing, my friend? Are we ready to talk about this Stones team that just keeps rolling?
Doing great, man. And yeah, it's great to be back as the Pistons continue one of their understated streaks, which is beefing with every single young team in the NBA. They played the Washington Wizards on Tuesday night. And of course, things get chippy. It's so weird. Like Charlotte, things always get chippy with them. With the Wizards, things get chippy with them. It feels like, who else do things get chippy with? What's another young team that they always seem to mix it up with? There's another one too. Houston.
Didn't they get into it with the Nets recently as well?
Yeah, Houston.
It feels like the Pistons get into it with every team. I mean, they've had a run-in with the Pacers this year. Like, this is just what happens when they play, it feels like.
But it feels like it's the young teams in particular. I don't know why. They really get a kick out of beefing with the guys that they're going to be playing against for the next 10 years. Hey, which I'm all for. People talk about there not being enough rivalries in the NBA. Beef Stew can create a bunch all by himself. And yeah, I mean, hey, happy to see Ausar Thompson not suffer any sort of a serious injury after he was elbowed in the face. I mean, that was a really scary play, actually. Like, he really could have gotten hurt there. So it was good to see him be okay. But yeah, great to be back. Great to still be talking about the Pistons winning. And it is really cool how this team manages to entertain us, even when they are playing against the dregs of the league and winning most of the game by double digits. You know what I mean? It's just fun watching this team, and it's fun to follow along, as long as you are somebody that actually follows along, right?
We're going to talk about that. I think it's something that people want to hear about. Kind of heard 97.1 talking about it a little bit as well. And so I think if they're talking about it, if they actually found something about the Detroit Pistons that they deem is worth talking about, I guess we should probably be talking about it as well then. But before we do that, I got to give a word to our weekly sponsors. They're supporting us, and they have supported us for quite some time now, and that's BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC. BetOnline continues to be your number one betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Also, before we get into it, got to give a quick word here. Wherever you're watching or listening from, just go hit that subscribe button, go hit that follow button, hit that like button, that 5-star review, leave us a comment. Tell us what you think of the show. You know, love seeing the interactions that we get on the show every week. We need people to continue to follow, support. A lot of you that are listening or are watching every week, you're not doing that. And it's like, hey, if you're going to come and watch us every week, you're going to come listen to us every week, just hit those buttons because that's going to help us out a lot. It's going to allow us to continue to produce awesome content over here at Palace of Pistons. So appreciate you guys. And without further ado, hey, let's get into it because Jasper, you mentioned it. Oh,
Aaron, I know. I'm sorry. I really quickly, I have something to say. A 15-year-old called me ugly on Twitter the other day, and I just want to say, like, of course, we love you follow along with basketball, but if you just want to say, like, hey, Jasper, Aaron, like, you're good-looking guys, like, girls think you're cute, that's cool too. We welcome any and all comments, especially those kind of comments, because it did really get me in my feelings, but. There was somebody else that was kind of in their feelings, Aaron, wasn't there?
There was, and it's a NBA legend. It's an all-time phenomenal player who, at one point in his career, actually twice, fell in the playoffs at the hands of the Detroit Pistons. It's Shaquille O'Neal. He's had a lot to say, and not a lot of good things to say about the Detroit Pistons as of late. On TNT's post-game show on Tuesday night following their national game coverage for the night, Shaquille O'Neal was praising the Pistons. But get this, as he praised them, he was giving significant props to their head coach, Chauncey Billups, for the job that he was doing with the team. And then after he was corrected by Candace Parker for saying that the Pistons head coach was Chauncey, he then went on to say that no, he does not watch the Detroit Pistons. He doesn't care about the Detroit Pistons, and was all up in his feelings after basically just being caught for not really knowing what he's talking about. This came it might have been a day or so after he was on a podcast talking about how he's not impressed with the Detroit Pistons because they're under 500 and they're not a true contender. Little does Shaquille O'Neal know that the Pistons are well above 500 and are one of the 5 best teams in the Eastern Conference according to their record. Shaquille O'Neal, is he not watching? Does he not care? Did he get flustered for making a mistake and have a semi sort of tantrum on the air? I mean, should the Pistons feel slighted by this? Like, does this matter to them? Like, Shaquille O'Neal is an all-time great. He is one of the more prominent voices in the NBA media just for his coverage on TNT. I mean, should the Pistons feel disrespected by this talk from Shaq?
I mean, look, it's Shaquille O'Neal's job to watch the NBA and comment on it. And the fact that he's not doing it just reveals exactly how seriously he takes that job and how seriously we should take him. Although I have to say, I'm personally shocked that anyone would accuse Shaquille O'Neal of being lazy in any way. That's certainly not something anybody has ever said about him during any point of his career, in either broadcasting or playing. Shaquille O'Neal, notoriously hard worker, and certainly he would never break up a team that won 3 championships because he refuses to work hard. Or get like super fat or whatever. Shaquille would never do that. He always has time to shoot another General commercial, though, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those things where it speaks to a larger issue in the NBA media overall. Even with the Pistons, nobody was talking about them, paying any sort of attention to them until they went on that 8-game winning streak, even though we knew far before then that they were a good team. I mean, this squad has the 6th best net rating in the NBA since January 1st. Like, this is not a mirage. This is genuinely, over the last 2.5 months, has been one of the top 10 teams in the entire league. And the fact that Shaquille O'Neal is admitting that he doesn't watch one of the top 10 teams in the NBA is ridiculous. That he's saying they're 4 games under 500 when they're now 8 games over 500. Just a complete joke. And it goes to show you the issues around how the NBA is being commentated on, how the people on TV approach the game and approach their analysis, and why there is such a perception among casual fans of the NBA not being a good product. How can you convince fans that the NBA is a good product when you, as the person whose job is to advertise the league for the TV provider you work for, for the channel you work for, I should say, how can you admit that you don't watch arguably the most entertaining team in the entire NBA? Like, why would you do that? Why would you not watch them? How can I take anything you say seriously? So yeah, to me, I mean, this is just like a microcosm of the entire issue regarding the NBA media sphere. I will say, I think it's great that like Candace Parker and I forget who else was on, maybe it was Vince Carter. I think they were both on the panel with Shaq. And they pushed back immediately against him, like just being like, why would you say this about Detroit? They're young, they're fun, they're awesome to watch, and they're punching so far above their weight. So, yeah, I mean, I think Shaq is just a joke. We all know this, but it reveals a larger issue in the NBA media sphere, one that I think is being corrected, but probably we're going to have to wait until after the Pistons go to the playoffs and wait until next year to see them properly spoken about in the context they deserve.
I'll say that, all this talk about the show that Shaquille O'Neal is on inside the NBA, there's been all this talk about, with all the media rights deliberations, if you lose inside the NBA and you lose these guys, that's a real loss for the league. These guys are a great source of entertainment. They do this amazing job. And I've never felt that way. In my position, I've always felt the show demeans the product that it discusses. It demeans the players in the league, whether they're, doing these segments on top players in the league that haven't won yet or have a bad game and they're just completely trashing them, or they're talking about all these players and how they deserve to be playing for the Shanghai Sharks or whatever in China. I've just felt that their show has been done more harm for the NBA than good. And I'll single out a couple of the guys there because I don't think it's all of them. I think Ernie is great. I think Kenny does a nice job, but it's definitely Shaq and Charles who have really said a lot of negative things about the players and the state and the game of the NBA that I just think are so harmful to the sport. And if people are watching that to be entertained and their source of entertainment is hearing these guys bash on young players, stars, teams, whoever, if that's entertainment to you, like I don't know, like that's just, I kind of feel bad. Like why would you be entertained by that? And I hate to see in such an important national spotlight that these are the guys talking about the league, and it shouldn't be that way. These guys are all-time greats. They're legends in the sport. They're legends in the league's history. You'd want them uplifting the next generations that have followed them, and they're just doing the exact opposite. So, I'm not surprised by it. They've proven time and time again, the likes of Shaquille O'Neal, that they're not paying attention to teams across the league, that they're not paying attention to players across the league. So this doesn't shock me. Should the Pistons care about this? I don't think they should. They've got a lot bigger priorities right now. They've caught in a lot of slander and a lot of slight over the years, and it's certainly been, earned at times. I mean, the 28-game win streak from last season, there was no positive spin to put on it while it was happening last year. Obviously, now you can look at it and say, look at how far they've come. A 28-game losing streak last year to 37 wins and a top 6 team in their conference a year later. But, this is not a time where they deserve to be catching slander or deserve to be being mocked in the way that Shaquille O'Neal mocked them on national television. And it's only going to hurt the sport, a sport that needs to continue to grow its fan base and re-engage its fan base from not just being fans that watch highlights and clips on social media, but watches the game and watches games that don't just include the biggest stars in, potential league history in LeBron James and Stephen Curry, but these other teams that have younger players and younger stars like Cade Cunningham and the Detroit Pistons. Like, they need to grow the fan base and these players and their brands. And these main talking heads for the league are only hurting that. So I don't think the Pistons need to feel slighted. They've got a lot bigger things going on. They're trying to, win a playoff series. They're trying to do a lot greater things than having to worry about what Shaquille O'Neal has to say.
I think the issue for me is not that Charles Barkley is on TV showing his ass. because I think Charles Barkley is funny. My issue is not that there is a national show that is dedicated to entertainment value over basketball analysis. My issue is that there's no balance. And you look at Inside the NBA, that is a show that has no balance. It's great. I'm happy to have Charles Barkley act a fool because I think Charles Barkley is hilarious. But I would like there not to be another bigger fool in every single sense of the word bigger on the opposite end of the desk in Shaquille O'Neal. I'd like somebody that actually analyzes the game more so than Kenny Smith does. You know, I'm fine with there being an entertainment-only show, but give us actual shows with basketball analysis on them as well. I think that's all I'm really looking for is like, it can't just be Tim Legler. How is Tim Legler the only guy on any national platform that actually talks about basketball? There has to be a better balance between the entertainment value and the actual analysis of the game. That's something that the NFL does really, really well. And I'm not saying that those shows are necessarily going to be as popular as Inside the NBA, nor necessarily should they be. But they provide something else to where a fan that's looking for in-depth analysis can have an outlet, and a casual fan that is trying to learn more about the game can actually have an opportunity to do so without having to find some YouTuber, way out of the way. I just think it's as simple as that. There's just no balance with it. So, yeah, I don't think the Pistons should be worrying about it. Shaquille O'Neal's a fool, but it would be really, really nice to see the NBA media just shift a little bit more towards the center in terms of that value versus analysis toss up there. So, yeah.
And it's not that the show needs to get super analytical or super X's and O's and be breaking down defensive coverages and all of this in the weeds type stuff. You know, I don't think that's what anybody's really saying. And I'm also not saying that players or teams are above being critiqued, because I think that that's certainly fair to critique guys if they make mistakes or teams are having a bad game or bad season, whatever. These guys are all being paid millions of dollars. They're professional athletes. It comes with the territory.
Yeah, but when Shaq's putting JaVale McGee on Shaqting a Fool every single night.
Yeah, there's, like you were saying, there's a balance to how you cover the league. And, you know, if you're not going to watch a certain team or a certain player, or you're just going to talk negatively about them and bash them and mock them out of, you know, just purely not knowing anything about them, then just skip talking about the matter, because I just think it does more harm than good. And that's really all else I have to say on it.
Just get a guy like Allen Iverson. Like, that's all I'm asking for. It doesn't have to be a dude who's going to be talking about, you know, how Tex Winter's offense evolved via the triangle. Like, it doesn't have to be that. It just could be a guy who goes, yeah, I like the NBA. I think players are talented, and I'm going to give them their kudos, right?
100%. All right, let's move on here away from Shaq but into another subject that I think kind of is along the same veins of, like, are the Pistons worthwhile? Are they worth your time, worth watching, worth believing in? I want to talk about the Pistons schedule and how it's played out this year. You know, you look at some of the top teams across the league. The Pistons have been playing statistically like a top 5 team in the NBA for a couple months now, really since the start of 2025. But you look at their schedule across the entire season, going back into 2024, you know, they have several losses to teams in the division. They have a bad divisional record with a lot of losses mixed between the Cavs, Bucks, and Pacers. They've lost all 3 of those teams on several occasions. They've lost to the Nuggets twice this year. They've lost to the Warriors twice this year. They lost to the Celtics 2 out of 3 times. And they still have to play Milwaukee twice. They have to play Oklahoma City twice. They're going to get Cleveland again. But if you look at Detroit's schedule and you're trying to say, hey, like, is this Detroit team a real contender? Do they have a legitimate chance to make a run in the postseason? Are you concerned about how they fared in their schedule when it comes against playing against the league's best? Do they have enough wins against some of the top tier teams in the league to have that faith that they're actually capable of doing something in the playoffs and not just getting there?
I definitely think there's a reason for concern. Look, they are one of only 2 teams that are within the top 6 of their own conference that have a losing record against teams with a record of 500 or better. They're 14-22 on the season. The Memphis Grizzlies are 15-17 on the season. Those are the only 2 that are in there, like, in the playoffs, not the play-in, that have a losing record as of right now against winning teams. So, yeah, I think there is definitely a reason to be concerned there. That being said, there are also a lot of extenuating circumstances around that. Look, this team was not very good to start the season. We should not sugarcoat that fact. This was not a great team in October, November, and December. This was a below average team. And so when you look at that, a lot of the meat of their more difficult games came towards the beginning of the season. That's a big reason why they have as many losses as they do. Since, like the calendar year changed, they've been a lot better against good teams and against bad teams. They're crushing bad teams, and they are at very worst very much in the end of games against good teams. So, yeah, the overall record's a little concerning, but when you look at the other side of it, as I've said, this team has the 4th best net rating in the NBA since January. This team has one of the best defenses in the entire league. This team has a starting 5 that has the best net rating, the second best net rating of any 5-man unit with 150 or more minutes played since January. So, sure, is it a reason to be concerned? A little bit, but they have opportunities to beat good teams coming up, as you've stated. And when you look at the teams that they are potentially going to match up with, they fared pretty well against the New York Knicks this year, even when they weren't playing at their best. And you're going to have another opportunity, 2 opportunities to face off against Milwaukee, which could determine who is getting a home court advantage in the playoffs. And within that own matchup, even like it could be a thing where the 4-5 seed is determined by a 2-game swing against Milwaukee. So they're going to have their opportunities. I think it's a little concerning, yes, when you look at the overall record, but there's a lot of ways you can look at it to where you go, okay, I can understand how they've gotten a lot better since the beginning of the year, how this record's a bit deceiving, and how they have an opportunity to really show that they are beyond that overall record and they've moved up in the standings and in the estimation of who the best teams in the NBA are.
There's so much to say about this, and I agree that there is concern with the fact that against some of the best, the Pistons have not fared well this year, especially in the division. You would have liked to have seen them win some games against Indiana, against Cleveland, against Milwaukee. On the flip side there, you could say they were a Darius Garland half-court buzzer beater away from beating Cleveland. They played a close game against Indiana that they fell apart in late. The Bucks are a brutal matchup for Detroit, and Milwaukee saw Detroit early in the season when the Pistons were still working through their defensive identity. More recently, you look back at that loss to Golden State and you're like, well, you're a Draymond Green 3-pointer away from likely winning that basketball game. So it's like, yeah, the Pistons have lost some games against some of the best, but that's also to be expected. Guys, this was a team that won 14 games last year. Nobody expected the Pistons to be in this spot. And now that they are, I'm not saying that they're playing with house money, even though they really are at this point, considering the change in winning ways that this team has experienced this year. But I never, even now that they are a playoff team, I don't expect them to be at the caliber of the Denver Nuggets, of the Cleveland Cavaliers, of the Milwaukee Bucks. The second best player on this team is Tobias Harris, who, yeah, he's great this year, but like the Bucks' second best player is Damian Lillard, and they have a top 5 player in the league in Giannis, right? The Cavs have Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen. Those are all 4 guys that have made an all-star game. So the Pistons with a roster that, just being honest, being very frank, is not as good as the other top teams in this league. For them to be in this spot, it's a testament to how good they are, despite not always beating some of the best across the league. And to be fair, they have a win against the Celtics. They've beaten the Knicks. They've beaten the Clippers once. They have beaten other good teams in the league.
They beat LA twice. And I think you actually just brought up another really, really good and important piece of context, Aaron. They play in the Central Division. They play in the hardest division in basketball, in my opinion. I think you can make an argument for the Southeast. But when you look at it, every single one of those teams in either is like 4 of the 5 are in the top 6. And the Bulls, which are easily the worst team in the division, they're the 10 seed right now. So every single one of those teams is seeing the postseason in the Central Division. And when you look at the division by division breakdown, Detroit Pistons against the Atlantic Division, 11-5. Against the Southeast Division, 10-6. Against the Northwest Division, 4-3. Against the Pacific Division, 5-4. Against the Southwest, 3-2. Against the Central, they are 4-9. And that right there is exactly where you can explain the majority of these losses to 500 or better teams. They're playing 3 of the better teams in the entire league. And I think when you look at the breakdown against the Western Conference and in road games, this is a team with a winning road record. This is a team with a 12-9 record against the Western Conference. So you have to, in my opinion, take that with a grain of salt. Who's the other team that's in the top 6 with a losing record? The Memphis Grizzlies, who play in the other division that you can argue is the toughest one in all of basketball right now. So, yeah, I just think you have to take it with a grain of salt. Is it a little concerning that they have these losses? Yes. Is it easily explainable by the fact that they weren't good at the beginning of the season? Their schedule at the beginning of the season was really, really hard, and they play in the hardest division in basketball. I think it's kind of that simple. When you look at how they performed against the other top teams in the league, they've done really, really well. And that's another thing with the Central is like, I think that the Pacers have the best, one of like the 3 best Cade defenders in the league in Andrew Nembhard. Guards Cade really, really tough. They have Miles Turner, who can shoot the 3. Really tough matchup for Jalen Duren. You look at the Cavaliers. I mean, enough said. That's the best team in basketball, arguably. And you have the Bucks, who also represent one of the worst matchups possible for the Detroit Pistons. So, it is a reason to be concerned, but there are so many reasons you also don't really need to be concerned about that. You know what I mean? I think the concern just really comes down more to who they end up facing in the playoffs more than anything else.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of great points there. You bring up the road record, you bring up the divisional records. I mean, the Pistons are one of 7 teams in the league that have 19 or more road wins. It's a very tall task to be good on the road throughout an entire season, and the Pistons have been more than good. They've been really good. You laid out the division, you laid out the conference. The Pistons against the Western Conference are obviously the stronger conference overall. They have a positive record. So it's really just those divisional games that have been the separation for Detroit. And I think we'll see, as the rest of the season plays out, I think their schedule's a little bit lighter. And I think that's, obviously as they try to make a push in the seeding, like that's a good thing. But I also see the need to face some teams that are going to give them a real test. And they're going to see Oklahoma City on Saturday. They're a title favorite. They're going to see Milwaukee twice. They're going to see Cleveland again. So they're going to have these opportunities. And, if the Pistons go 0-5 or 0-6 or 0-7 against these other, call it top 4 or 5 teams in each conference, then it's not going to be good. But I also think at the end of the day, if you're talking about this team being a playoff team that's not good enough to compete with the best of the best, you'll take that over being a 14 to 20 win team, which is where this team has been for the last, however long it's been. It's been a very long time. I mean, I guess they had the one playoff season back in 2018, but for the large majority of a decade, they've been an absolute bottom dweller in the league. So to be a 4, 5, 6 seed that isn't able to beat the best of the best, you'll take that over winning 14 games in a 28-game losing streak.
The fact that we're saying is the biggest cause for concern that they're not beating the best teams in the league. I think that says it all. Dude, this team is essentially like a mortal lock to more than triple their win total from last year. They are going to beat 42 games. I think there's a legitimate question to be said. If they can beat if they can beat a couple of these over 500 teams, these tough squads that you're talking about coming up on the record on the schedule, the rest of the games they have to play are really, really easy. They got Washington again. They have Toronto. They got some real easy ones. If they can steal a win against OKC and somehow steal a win against Milwaukee and then steal another one in there, dude, you're talking about 50 wins. They legit could win 50 games this year. I don't think it will happen. They're going to have to go 13-3 the rest of the way. I don't think that's super likely, but is it really it's not impossible, dude. It's genuinely not impossible.
I think it's absolutely insane that we're talking about that.
I know. You're not laughing me out of the room, and they could do it. I don't think they will. I wouldn't put money on it, but 10-6 the rest of the way, 47 wins.
Yeah.
Yeah, brother. Frankly, that's the expectation.
And you look at the schedule coming up. Obviously, you mentioned the Oklahoma City game. They're going to get the Wizards before that on Thursday night. So the night of when this podcast comes out, it's coming out Thursday morning. So if you're listening the day of, you're hearing it before the Wizards game. They're going to get the Pelicans twice coming up. They've got Dallas, obviously very depleted Dallas team, a San Antonio team without Victor Wembanyama. So they've definitely got some very winnable games coming up. I mean, and let's also look at the back end of their schedule. Their last 5 games, they're getting the Grizzlies, the Kings, the Knicks, and then the Bucks twice. So it's that end of the season's not easy. I mean, those are 5 solid teams. Sacramento maybe isn't having the year that they wanted, but they're definitely capable of beating the Pistons in a single game. So that back end of the schedule is tough, but there's just so many games that you look at here with some true opportunity, but also like we're talking about in this discussion, this is a great opportunity. Yeah, they have some very winnable games, but they also have some games against playoff teams, and I think that's going to be important for them, especially as maybe this roster gets a little bit healthier and they're adding a key piece back into the rotation here. Let's talk about that now as we kind of move into our final topic. And the last medical update that we had gotten on Jaden Ivey was at the beginning of February. It was the first week of February. We're supposed to get another update a month from that update, which I want to say was on February 7th off the top of my head. So we have passed that month time frame, and there hasn't been an official update on Jaden Ivey yet. From what we've seen, he's been at games now he's been going to games for a while now, but we haven't gotten any updates on what his practice status is, what his progression has looked like. If there's, a thought on him coming back this year, we haven't gotten any sort of update since February on that. And so should there be concern that Ivey might not be coming back this year? Or should the Pistons maybe not even be worrying about that? Should they be saying, look at how good we are right now? Do we want to bring in another player to this mix that is going to need the minutes, is going to need the ball, that might disrupt what is going on here? I'm curious what you think on really that last topic. I don't know what. It's tough to speculate on a player's health and a player's availability. You never really want to do it, but it just feels like we should know by now what his status is going to be. It just feels that way. What's there not to know at this point? He's either progressing to the point where he's going to be practicing again soon. I mean, the typical time frame should, in theory, state that he should be back this year. If you're going off the estimated time frame, and you got to think that these athletes who are working with the best medical professionals in the world have the best access to all the rehab and recovery type of opportunities. Like, you'd have to think he's coming back, but not hearing anything and not seeing him in a practice uniform, like, there's also a little bit of concern there that I think is fair for people to have.
Yeah, man. I mean, shoot, they had, talk about medical research and advancements. They had Kobe spinning his blood like he was in a Soul Cycle class back in like 2011, brother. That was a long time ago. They've gotten even better since then. So yeah, look, this has always been the thing with Ivy is it's really just so close. Just when he broke his leg to when the Pistons were going to be in the playoffs, it was always going to be like this. It was going to be up down to the wire. And the Pistons have, under Tom Gores, always been pretty tight-lipped about injury updates and stuff like that. But you definitely would like to get has resumed on-court activities update from Jaden Ivey if you're going to get him back for the playoffs. Look, I've said I really, really want them to get Jaden Ivey back for the playoffs. I think for multiple reasons. One, he will just help the team. We saw it last week in the Clippers game and in the Warriors game where those teams just went all out on Cade Cunningham. They were basically trapping him at half court every single possession, trying to force the ball out of his hands. And the Pistons were able to mitigate that a little bit with Dennis Schroeder, which, by the way, man, what a great pickup that has been. I do not think the Pistons are where they are right now if they are playing Marcus Sasser over him for the last month. I just think he's been such a boon to this team. But you really saw how badly they needed it because Cade is great at a lot of things, but he has really struggled with those double team traps, especially in the half court offense. It's been a struggle for him this year, especially against good defensive teams. So having an extra ball handler like Jaden Ivey out there would just be huge in taking the pressure off of Cade and allowing him to get more one-on-one looks or create with his passing advantages for the rest of the team that they can't really take advantage of right now without Schroeder on the court because they don't have ball handlers. Like, yeah, I trust Jalen Duren to take it to the rack on a DHO that he rejects the handoff and just turns and takes it. That's fine. But that's 2 dribbles and a dunk. Like, that's not creating offense. That's not driving from the 3-point line to the lane and kicking it out. It's just not the same thing. Tobias Harris isn't that dude. Tim Hardaway Jr. isn't that dude. Malik Beasley isn't that dude. Asar Thompson maybe one day could be that dude, but currently is not. He's still so young. So, yeah, I really want to see Jaden Ivey back for that reason, simply because I think he could be the difference in them winning a playoff series or not. The second reason I want to see him back is he is up for an extension this offseason. What the hell are you going to do there? Yeah, I think Jaden Ivey could help win them a playoff series. But what if he comes back and he's not good in a playoff series? What if his ball handling is not up to playoff level ball pressure? What if he shrinks in the half-court offense? What if he's not able to find chemistry on the fast break with the rest of the guys? What if, you're assuming he's coming in and, I mean, you hope he doesn't take Asar Thompson out of the starting lineup, but, who does he take out of the starting lineup? Is he in the starting lineup? How are you playing him? All these things matter moving forward, especially when you're talking about potentially giving him an extension this offseason or not giving in an extension and seeing how next season plays out. He took a pretty big leap this year. What if he takes a bigger one next year? Well, then you're talking about a guy that maybe you could have gotten on a $20-something million deal, and now you got to pay him $30-something million a year. Changes a whole lot about what this team is able to do moving forward. We've seen that. So it's a different sport, but in the NFL, you can see right now, like the Cincinnati Bengals, they are having to pay guys way more money than they would have to otherwise because they refused to pay them when they could have. And it's hurting their ability to do things in free agency. So you don't want the Pistons to get into that kind of situation. you really want to see what you can get from Jaden Ivey, both from an on-court perspective and from a financial front of office perspective in terms of how this team is going to progress moving forward, because he is going to be a big piece of that.
Yeah, I think you want Jaden Ivey back, and you want him back as soon as possible. With the number of games that the Pistons have left, you'd like to have some time to integrate Jaden Ivey back into the rotation, onto the floor, allow him to get comfortable, see what lineups he's going to fit best in now, because this is a different team than when Jaden Ivey was healthy in 2024. They added Dennis Schroeder. They got back Asar Thompson. Asar Thompson's now off of his minutes restriction. He's in the starting lineup. Dennis Schroeder's doing a lot of the ball handling off the bench. When the Pistons go to that 2 ball handler lineup, it's Cade Cunningham and Dennis Schroeder. So a lot of the stuff that I think Jaden Ivey would and could be doing, a lot of those responsibilities have been given to Dennis Schroeder. So I think there's going to need to be a period of time to get Jaden Ivey back into the fold if you're going to be comfortable with him playing again this year. I don't think this is a situation where you want to put him into a playoff setting in his first game back and expect good results. And it's tough because you're trying to balance. We want to bring him back. We want to give him time. We want to get him situated. But I think you'd also really like to know this year, like, hey, how does a Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey backcourt fare in the playoffs? How do both of these players individually and as in a duo and in a lineup, how do they perform in the biggest moments of the season? So you're trying to balance both those things, and you're just getting to that time of the year where it's like, it's not now or never, but it's getting pretty darn close on if he's going to be back. You know, if he's, I just can't envision them wanting to disrupt the success that this team has had if he's not able to come back until the middle of April in the first round of the playoffs. I just think that's asking a lot. So I think the Pistons certainly want him back. I think he certainly helps them if he's healthy and able to go. But that's the challenge. What he can do for them as a ball handler, what he can do for them as a dynamic downhill driver that can put pressure on the defense, that can alleviate some of the ball handling responsibilities of Cade Cunningham. Ivey was shooting 40% this year from the 3-point line before he got hurt. Like, he does a lot of good things. And, you know, I look at how Tim Hardaway Jr. has played as of late. He's been in I don't know if it's a shooting slump or he's just cooled off from a hot month that he had earlier this year, but he's just not hitting shots at a high enough rate. I don't think he's this world-beating defender that you have to have out on the court, even if he's not shooting the ball all that well. And he doesn't give you any playmaking from that quote-unquote shooting guard spot that he's playing right now. So, you know, I think the Pistons would love to add Jaden Ivey back into the starting lineup. I think they'd love his playmaking. If he's still shooting a good basketball, that would help this team. I mean, he is shooting a better percentage than Tim Hardaway Jr. this year, and it's not by just a point or two. It's by a significant margin. So, yeah, I think the Pistons would love to get him back. It's just I don't know when they're going to cross that threshold of, well, it's too late now because he hasn't gotten back. And I just it's tough being in this position where you don't really know what his health situation is, because you don't just want to speculate wildly, but you'd also like to know, as you're watching this team, if they're going to be able to add a very, very key piece back into the fold ahead of their first playoff appearance in over half a decade.
And look, you want to see what JB's going to do with him too, because I think we're in agreement. We would switch Tim Hardaway Jr. out of the starting lineup, but maybe JB Bickerstaff doesn't feel that way. And Asar Thompson, let's be honest, over the last week or so has really struggled. I think there's an issue of tired legs. I think there's an issue of teams kind of just honing in on him on the few things he does offensively, really just doing everything in their power to take away his ability to dunk the basketball. They're just like, no dunks to Asar. We cannot allow this to happen. He will destroy us. Like, we can't stop Duren, but we can at least stop Asar. You know, I think that's just what a lot of teams are doing as of right now. And his defensive impact has not been as strong as of late as well. And I think that's just tired legs, him just busting his ass all the time. But it'll be really interesting to see what happens. And one of the things that's been very fascinating about the Pistons this year is that outside of losing Jaden Ivey, look, when they lost Jaden Ivey, it's right around when they got Ausar Thompson back. And the rest of that starting five hasn't really had many injury issues. Guys have missed a couple games here and there, but it's been pretty consistent for the most part. So you actually have a pretty decent sample size of 5-man starting lineups for the Pistons this year. I tweeted this out the other day. The first 21, the Harris, Hardaway, Cunningham, Duren, Ivey, they played 21 games together. They had a net rating of negative 2.1 in those 21 games. In the 31 games without Jaden Ivey and with Ausar Thompson in the starting lineup, they have a net rating of plus 10. 31 games, they're 20-11 in those games, and they have a net rating of plus 10. What's the difference here? Well, with Jaden Ivey, their offensive rating, 119.8. Without him, 117.5. Okay, you see the offense has taken a little bit of a hit. The defense, though, 122 with Jaden Ivey, 107 with Ausar Thompson. That is a 15-point swing. That is huge. And again, we're not talking about like teeny tiny sample sizes. We're talking about, a combined 600 minutes here. It's not an entire NBA season, but it's not nothing. And so I think you have to really wonder, like, if you do bring back Jaden Ivey and you switch out Ausar Thompson, how does that affect your defense? Because we're seeing there's not a massive change in the offense, but there is a huge one in the Pistons' ability to play defense with Ausar Thompson in the lineup. So I think you have to answer that question. Is the Pistons defense so much better because Ausar Thompson is starting? Or is it because Jaden Ivey isn't starting? Or is it a combination of both? Like, can you make those two things work? Maybe you bring back Ivey and you bench Hardaway and your defense gets a little bit worse, but your offense gets a little bit better. I think you can work with that. Who knows? Again, these are just questions we need to have answered. That's the whole point of this discussion. This is why we want him back. What are they going to do with him? And how is he going to affect what is, as of right now, arguably the best starting five in basketball over the last 2 months, which again is insane to say.
No, I think in a perfect world, you want to see the lineup of Cunningham, Ivey, Ausar, Tobias, Duren, and you want to get a grasp of what they do together. And look, it's not that I don't think Tim Hardaway Jr. is a bad player. I don't think he's good enough to be a starting guard in the playoffs. I mean, we're seeing the limitations that this team has right now. And maybe it's not just on him. Maybe it's that, there's some limitations with Ausar Thompson out there, and there's some limitations with Jalen Duren out there, but they clearly need more ball handling. They clearly need another guy that can put pressure on the rim, and Tim Hardaway's just not shooting well enough right now. So I think you'd love to be able to get a look at essentially your core and Tobias Harris in a playoff setting, but they're going to need some time to get those guys an opportunity to gel together before the end of the regular season. So yeah, it's not an easy question. You can only speculate on it so much, but man, I think you're crazy if you don't want Jaden Ivey back in some capacity before the end of the season, if he's healthy to do it.
Yeah, ultimately, this is not a team, despite what the numbers over the last couple months say, this is not a team I think is a contender, like a true contender. I think they could win a playoff series and give somebody a tough out in the second round, but I don't think they are a true contender by any stretch of the imagination. They don't have the talent or the experience, but for sure, these games they matter, these playoff games, but they don't matter as much as your figuring out your future matters. You know what I mean? Yeah. And one last small little concern I will bring up. Jalen Duren has been a lot better since Jaden Ivey went down. I think a big reason for that is because they've been forced to give him more playmaking duties. They've been forced to put the ball in his hands more and say, hey, create your own opportunities. Create opportunities for others. I am interested to see if Jaden Ivey returning back and, picking up at his 24-25% usage, probably cutting into Jalen Duren's touches, how does that affect Jalen Duren's play? Because he's been way more locked in on the defensive end as well since his offensive responsibilities expanded. it's just something I would want to look. It's just something I want to look at. How does Jaden Ivey returning affect everybody else on this team and the team as a whole?
There's a lot to figure out, and it all depends on getting Jaden Ivey back on the court. So there's so many different questions you can have about individual players, lineups, duos, whatever. We're not going to get those answers, though, until you actually can see the product on the court together and see what it ends up looking like. So we'll see if we get that update on Jaden Ivey soon. You know, they said it's coming in a month, so we're a little bit past a month. You know, they could release it on Thursday, right when this podcast is coming out. I could see that happening, knowing our luck. So we'll hopefully hear something soon on Jaden Ivey. But, gentlemen, that's the show. I mean, Jasper, anything else that you wanted to add here before we wrap up?
No. I mean, hey, you know the deal. So, like, subscribe, comment that I'm handsome in the comment section. Like, that's all I'm asking of you folks. Okay, that's all I need from you. No, I'm just excited to see how the Pistons close out this season. I really think that they have a great opportunity to do something really, really special. We keep saying it. I just really love watching this team, and I want more people to watch this team. So let's get the playoffs going so we can get that happening, man. And so, like, the rest of the city, the people that haven't caught on yet, that they can really see what Detroit basketball is all about all over again.
Well, before everyone goes, please take a moment, subscribe, follow, wherever you're watching or listening from. Leave us that like, leave us that heart, leave us that 5-star rating. Go leave us a comment on something about the show. What'd you like? What'd you dislike? What did you think about what we talked about? What do you think about Jaden Ivey? Should the Pistons want him back? Are they going to get him back? Tell us what you think. I mean,
what do you think about my mustache? Does it make my cheekbones pop?
As always, make sure to go over and subscribe to palaceofpistons.com as well. That's how you're going to get all of our content sent directly to your email inbox, completely free of charge, and it's going to help us continue to grow. We greatly appreciate you guys tuning in every week. That is going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Bleep. Thanks so much for watching or listening, and we will see you guys next time.